Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you. My name is Brian Wyatt, and it really, truly is an honor to be the first one up here to welcome you today on behalf of the International Storytelling Center as we are gathered together to celebrate the life of a remarkable person, Jimmy Neal Smith. In 2001, my wife and I were living in eastern North Carolina, and I got a call for an interview for a job as a pastor of a small church in Limestone, Tennessee, which is about 9 miles down the road this way. I had never been to East Tennessee before in my life. Didn't know the first thing about it. Church put us up for the weekend in this little place called the Eureka Inn. That way? I'm not sure. Yeah, right next door that way, I think. And if I recall correctly, though no guarantees on the accuracy of my memory, but it's not like an accurate memory is important for storytelling anyway, or at least facts aren't, right? I am pretty sure that the Storytelling Center was still under construction the first time we came to visit here. So we made our first trip over this way, and I remember the week before we were getting ready to come, I had told a friend of mine in North Carolina, I said, we're getting ready to go, we might be moving, getting ready to go interview. We're staying in some tiny little town called Jonesborough, never even heard of it. His eyes lit up. He said, oh, you mean the home of the International Storytelling Center? I know you're going to get this job. I am so excited for you. I cannot wait to come visit you in your new job. How about the first weekend of October? That one's not made up. That was the first I had ever heard about the International Storytelling Festival, but 6 months later, March 2002, we ended up moving here. And that fall of 2002, we experienced our first time at the Storytelling Festival, or at least part of it. I didn't make it for the whole weekend, but we sat up, up in that direction, up on a hill, Saturday night, listening to international ghost stories. I don't know if you've ever been to that part of the Storytelling Festival. It was fabulous. Got hooked, and my mother-in-law's sitting out here too. She and my mother, I think, came up about every year to visit us, not because they cared about seeing us, but because it was free lodging for the Storytelling Festival. We've now been in Tennessee probably, close to a quarter century. And throughout that time, all of these connections kept popping up for me to Storytelling Center, to Jimmy Neal. A couple times we were fortunate. I pastor a church. I'm now down in Elizabethton. At the time we were in Limestone. We were fortunate enough to get some storytellers to come church on occasion. We've gotten to go throughout the week and hear storytellers in residence across the street. Been an avid reader my whole life, and I love a good story. But what Jimmy Neal helped to create throughout his vision wasn't just a local form of entertainment. Storytelling, as we know, is a shared experience. We're not just listening to someone, we become part of that experience. And that's a fascinating thing to me, because part of my job, at least, is telling stories too. And I love that, I think for Jimmy, believed that telling stories was a way of building community. Storytelling could revive towns, heal divisions, teach history as well as any textbook ever could. And so for 50 years now, he started this thing the year I was born, 1973, in a high school gym. And for 50 years, he's been behind this movement of connection that brings all of us here today. The connection we feel is this shared experience of how a story can draw us in to something deeper. I think it's a connection we feel to one another, a connection we feel to our ancestors who spent nights sitting around a campfire, passing around the same kind of history and wisdom and meaning that we are here to celebrate today. And you're going to hear a lot about Jimmy this afternoon. We'll have different stories, different parts of his life shared. You all know there was much more to him than just storytelling. He co-founded organizations, he ran restaurants, he taught students, he served as mayor, he authored books, he built institutions, probably inspired half the people or more in this room to pick up a microphone or a pen or a platform. He put Jonesborough on the map, not just with billboards or big box stores, but with stories. Stories that made you laugh, think, cry, or lean forward just a little bit more to catch the next word. And so I love that this is the way we are choosing to celebrate his life this afternoon, by telling stories, by helping to continue his legacy and his dream, by doing the thing together that he loved so much in his life, bringing together storytellers, musicians, all of us. And it doesn't matter if we're a storyteller or not, we are a part of the story because we are here. So I am thrilled and honored to welcome us here today, all of you here today, not to a memorial for Jimmy Neal Smith, but to a celebration, a festival, carrying on a legacy that he started of laughter, of community, of a man who made it all possible. So thank you for being here today, for showing up, for sitting in this sacred storytelling space today, because you give a gift with your presence that sometimes words can't capture. But you are here to be a part of Jimmy's legacy. So thank you. Welcome us here to remember Jimmy, to laugh, to cry, and to tell some good stories.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Parson, president of International Storytelling Center, and on behalf of the International Storytelling Center, welcome everyone to Jackson Theater today to celebrate the life of Jimmy Neal. And on behalf of ISC, we also offer our condolences again to the family of Jimmy Neal. And we're here today not just to mourn the loss of a great man, but to celebrate the extraordinary life of Jimmy Neal Smith, a vision, a builder, a doer, and a leader. Jimmy Neal often described himself as a country boy with a dream, but what he accomplished with that dream is anything but simple. With vision, with determination and heart, he brought storytelling, one of humanity's oldest and most powerful traditions, back to the cultural spotlight in the United States. And he did it with a fierce love for his hometown, Jonesborough, Tennessee. Jonesborough wasn't always the bustling hub we know today. At one time, its main street was quiet, its future was uncertain, but Jimmy Neal saw something that others didn't. He believed in stories that could breathe life into a community. He envisioned a Jonesborough where people from across the country, even across the world, would gather not just to visit, but to connect through stories. And so in 1973, he organized the Storytelling Center. 60 people showed up, just 60. But Jimmy Neal had the foresight and perhaps the audacity to give that modern gathering a bold name, the National Storytelling Festival. It grew into its name and then beyond it. Today, the festival draws over 10,000 people a year, and it has inspired storytelling festivals across the globe and has helped Jonesborough earn its designation as the storytelling capital of the world. But it didn't stop there. Just 2 years after establishing the festival, he founded an organization that ultimately became the International Storytelling Center, a beacon for storytellers and listeners from all walks of life. Under his leadership, he launched educational programs, cultural exchanges, workshops, and partnerships that use storytelling as a tool for healing, for understanding, and connection. He championed storytelling in classrooms, hospitals, and workplaces. Anywhere a story could make a difference. The revival Jimmy Neal began became a movement which has touched lives in ways we may never fully measure. But through the continued work of the International Storytelling Center, through each of us who carry the tradition, his story lives on. Today, as we honor his life, let us make a promise that we may continue his work, that we may listen to one another with open hearts, that we may speak boldly and dream generously, just as he did. Let us remember Jimmy Neal Smith, not only for the institutions he built and for the lives he touched, for the legacy of connection and compassion he leaves behind. That legacy is immeasurable. It lives on in every story told on the festival stage, in each child whose imagination sparks when hearing a story, and every stranger who becomes a friend through a shared experience. Thank you, Jimmy Neal. May your memory be a blessing, and may your story be continued to be told again and again by those who loved you, learned from you, and were inspired by you. And on behalf of our staff and board of International Storytelling Center, we welcome all of you here today, especially the storytellers who have come from far away, from North Carolina, from West Virginia, from Philadelphia, and across the country. And we welcome you to the celebration for Jimmy Neal. Thank you.
Thank you for waiting for me to hobble up. My name is Bob Browning. Jimmy Neal Smith was one of my best friends. I loved him, and I really miss him. It was not hard to like Jimmy because he was always pleasant. He was always smiling. He always acted like he was glad to see you. Whether he was or not, he certainly acted that way. He was courteous. He was optimistic. He was funny, really funny. And he was full of enthusiasm for new ideas. He was always contemplating new ideas. And he would love to ask you your opinion or your advice on an idea that he was just thinking about at the time. He would go on trips with our small group of friends. You saw some of the photographs of that. And he always had a yellow legal pad with him. We used to call it Jimmy's maxi pad. and he would just put his thoughts down on paper. And it really didn't matter where we were. I'm surprised. And he did bring one to the Amazon. I'm surprised you didn't see it in the photos, but it was always with him. And every year we would try to go to the beach, and he would have his maxi pad and say he'd go to the beach with us and say how much he loved the beach, except for the sand and the salt water and the sun. So he'd sit in the house and look out every once in a while and work on his maxi pad and writing big numbers down all the time. And he was always contemplating. There was always the question about what are we eating next. And but he was, regardless of where we were going and regardless of what we were doing, Jimmy was always humorous. Whether he intended to be or not, he was always humorous on the trips. He loved Jonesborough like no other human being. He was fascinated with Jonesborough's history and Washington County's history and the importance of that history in the history of Tennessee and even the nation. He felt like that history should be shared. And when he was in high school and even in college, he wrote a weekly column in the Herald and Tribune, the local newspaper, that was called Heritage and Buckskin. And he later ended up taking all of those columns and putting it together in his first book, really. I moved into Jonesborough in 1977, and I knew two things about Jonesborough, besides the fact that I thought it was a cute town, and Janet, my wife-to-be, always wanted to live in Jonesborough. It was one of the reasons we were there. And one of those reasons was the Parson's table, which I had come from Greene County and enjoyed immensely. It was the place to go in Northeast Tennessee, that restaurant. And the other was the National Storytelling Festival. And it both turned out that those were initiatives by Jimmy Neal Smith and his effort to support bringing Jonesborough back to life. The town had just bricked the sidewalks and put street lamps underground, the wiring for street lamps underground, and done the replicas of the old Jonesborough street lamp. But the town was losing population. So many stores were vacant, even homes were vacant. And Jimmy held to the vision that Jonesborough had to change, that the days of large crowds of farmers and residents coming into Jonesborough for services and goods were gone. And he felt like that they needed to be replaced by visitors and by people who came into Jonesborough because the people were great, and because it was a great place to live. In order to do that, he felt like a couple things needed to happen. One was that the town needed to focus on its history and provide efforts to establish a great tourism program and marketing program. The other is to focus on providing the facilities and the programs that were necessary for a great quality of life, to make it a great bedroom community, to make it a place where people really wanted to live. In 1976, Jimmy decided to engage in impacting the town's future in a more formal way, and he ran for alderman and was elected in 76. And 2 years later, he ran for mayor against the former mayor and won by a wide margin. And that board that was elected with Jimmy immediately, and that board was Ernest McKinney, Toby Bledsoe, Sam May, and Wayne Taylor. And that board set out on a list of things that they wanted to achieve while they were in office. And despite the fact that during that time period there was continuous and mean-spirited opposition and harassment of Jimmy and in particular and that board by the former mayor and a few supporters. It was amazing during the 6 years of Jimmy's administration what that board and what he accomplished. Now, I'm just going to list off a few of those things because it is pretty amazing. They built a new town hall and post office. They built the visitor center and museum. Jimmy got grant funding from the state to help the county build a new library. They started the recreation program. They had a senior center and started the senior center program. They established the tourism and marketing department of the town. They also created the town administrator's position and hired a town administrator. They developed Mill Spring Park, which was an eyesore at the time Jimmy was elected. They developed Christopher Taylor Park. They bought 110 acres and developed Persimmon Ridge Park with 3 ball fields and walking trails. And the board expanded the town limits. And at the time, there was only 1,660-some people when Jimmy was elected mayor as residents of Jonesborough. But there were so many places that were close by that were considered Jonesborough. They considered themselves Jonesborough. And an example of that would be the Arby's on the other side of the 4-lane. There was nothing on the other side of the 4-lane that was in the city limits, even though it was just a little bit more than a stone's throw from the new town hall. It was not in the city limits. And so there was a lot of that property that they worked with owners and brought into the city limits. At the time Jimmy was elected, the town was under a moratorium for water taps and for sewer taps. They had a 9-year-old water plant that could not produce enough water for the system. And Jimmy and the board constructed a new water plant that 45 years later is still serving Jonesborough and Washington County. The sewer system was putting effluent into Little Limestone Creek that did not meet the state guidelines, and the state had a moratorium on the town adding any additional sewer taps to the system. So Jonesborough was essentially put in a position that it couldn't grow. Jimmy Neal went down to Nashville and got funding for a new sewer plant. It was built in the next administration, but he got the funding for a new sewer plant, and also for a sewer collection system that served the people who had just been brought in to the city limits. And one of the best things he did was work with TVA to develop, he got TVA to fund the development of a flood prevention plan. We have 2 floodways that intersect in downtown Jonesborough. And Jimmy Neal, through the efforts of developing that plan and implementing a number of phases of that plan, it turned Jonesborough over at a period of time into a town that flooded any time there was a heavy rain, to just recently one of the few, if not the only town in this area that was in direct line with Hurricane Helene that did not flood. Jimmy and his board showed what quality leaders could accomplish and establish, and set a standard for achievement for future administrations that the people in town wanted and appreciated. As a result, residents in Jonesborough have continually elected outstanding and diverse leaders on the town boards. And those leaders have continued to improve the quality of life in Jonesborough. And Jonesborough, the way it is right now, continuously comes up when people are having discussions about the best small towns in Tennessee and the best small towns in America. Jimmy continued, even when he was out of office, to work on improving the ability to be a tourist destination. And he also worked to have a permanent home for storytelling in Jonesborough. He worked with Kevin McKinney, mayor, who's out here today, who was mayor for 9 years. Wonderful. And Jimmy and Kevin worked on a substantial amount of grant funding and the other funding that was necessary to build the Storytelling Center. Later on, he worked with Mayor Toby Bledsoe, who has passed on, but he worked with Toby, and they had 2 enhancement grants, large enhancement grants that built the wonderful park that's around the Storytelling Center. And Mayor Kelly Wolf is out here, and Kelly came in 10 years later and worked with Jimmy on what was necessary, essentially, to save the building and save the organization of ISC when it was going through the bankruptcy. And, because of that partnership and that working together, ISC continues to use that building as it used to, with much less cost incurred on an annual basis. Jimmy developed strong relationships with so many people. Whether you were a governor, a senator, funding agency, storyteller, he developed a great relationship with the Library of Congress, with the Smithsonian Institute, and he developed relationships with people all over the region. And it was his, I think, his special talent. And people trusted him and they believed in him, and they just naturally wanted to help him. And it's and they understood. And when we were in Nashville, the number of times that people say, "We know you're going to get this done," and we just like to. It sounds to us like it's going to be something special, and we want to be part of it. Jimmy believed, and the Reverend made points to this. Jimmy believed that the story was key to community building and the relationship building, that the human-to-human interaction united people together, enhanced tolerance and understanding. There was this strong belief, and he worked hard in Jonesborough, and we've done some really great things, I think, in town to prove that certainly is the case, that story, knowing somebody's story, it's just hard to hate them, is what it boils down to. I'll end by saying that the world was just a better place with Jim and Neil Smith in it. But his legacy is going to be felt by people for many decades to come. I love you.
Yeah. I don't know about me. So I'm Connie Reagan Blake, and I'm a storyteller and a longtime friend of Jimmy Neal's. I'm not used to having paper in front of me, but I thought the story might go 33, 34 hours if I didn't jot down a few things. So I decided to put some of it on paper. And I want to let you know I'm feeling very tender, and that means there might be some tears. But I want you not to worry about that. These are tears of joy, tears of reflection, and tears of sadness. Jimmy Neal Smith impacted my life and the lives of tens of thousands, maybe millions of storytellers and story listeners all across the world. His legacy continues. That is extraordinary. So I'm going to take us off. First now, I'm going to take us back to the early 1970s. I'd been hired at the Chattanooga Public Library as a full-time storyteller. Within a few weeks, I knew that was going to be part of my whole life. I was going to do this for the rest of my life. Then a few years later, a friend told me that she had heard this tiny town in East Tennessee, Northeast Tennessee, I was down in Chattanooga, that there was this guy named Jimmy Neal Smith, and he was organizing a storytelling festival. I said, are you sure? A storytelling festival? Now, I knew about folk festivals. I'd been telling stories at some of them. But I'd never heard of a festival that was devoted exclusively to storytelling. She said, yeah, and they're calling it the National Storytelling Festival. I thought, well, that's pretty brazen. So I wrote a letter. Do you remember that? Any of you here that still wrote? No texting, no cell phones, no computers, no internet. I wrote a letter. Dear Jimmy Neal Smith, I'm a storyteller. And I asked him for some details. He wrote me right back and welcomed me to come, gave me the scoop, and said he'd love to put me on stage. So I got my cousin, Barbara Freeman, who is here, and she and I took off in her little yellow truck. Sunday, October 14th, 1973, a beautiful autumn day, right here in Jonesborough, a block down, a small group of us gathered right outside the courthouse. Now, the night before, the first event of this National Storytelling Festival had kicked off at the local high school. The headliner was Jerry Clower. He was kind of famous on the radio, and he had been on the Grand Ole Opry. And after him, it was Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys came on. They took the stage. I mean, they were big time. That place was jamming. We had a great time. Sold out crowd, over 800 people. Very exciting. But that next day on Sunday, at the second event of the National Storytelling Festival, there were, now in my view, it was always 45 people. Jimmy Neal used to say 60, but we should maybe go in between and just give it 54. But we were all sitting in folding chairs, facing a flatbed truck. There were bales of hay on it, a few pumpkins, and a solitary microphone. And first off, there was an MC that was telling some not-so-funny jokes. And then a pretty boring politician. And then they announced this tall, lanky mountain man. And Ray Hicks walked up, bib overalls. He had a harmonica sticking out of one pocket, and out of the other pocket there was a can of Prince Albert tobacco. He got behind that microphone, which looked like a silver praying mantis, and he looked up at the heavens, and he started in. Once, there's a boy named Jack. Him and his mama lived up in the mountains, and they were poor. And so we were transported to another world. I was mesmerized. All of us were, this small, intimate group. We were taken to a different time and a different place. I couldn't take my eyes or my ears off of him. It was magic, pure magic. Afterwards, we gathered around in little clusters, still telling stories, listening to each other. And, well, Jimmy Neal, he experienced all of that. He saw how entranced we all were. And he had this incredible wisdom and insight. I like to think of it as a gift from heaven. When he looked around on that Sunday afternoon, he knew somehow, even though that huge event the night before had been such a crowd, raised lots of money, and in those terms was a great success, Jimmy Neal knew that what was unfolding here, this is what he wanted for Jonesborough. This is what he wanted for storytelling. And as it turned out, the world was ready. And I remember Jimmy Neal was only 26 at the time, and he had opened the Parson's Table restaurant. It was another very innovative idea of his, transforming this old, beautiful church with quite a history into a destination restaurant, bringing more folks to Jonesborough. It was the same year as the festival started. The following year, Jimmy Neal asked me to be featured at the second National Storytelling Festival. I came to town a day early, and we met in his office, which was over at the restaurant. We ended up talking until the wee hours. We were talking about storytelling, about how the old mountain folks passed along these stories to the younger people coming up. We talked about what the future of storytelling might be, how we could find more people to come, how we could enhance Jonesborough and the communities here and all of the businesses, how we could spread the word. We even did a little bit of clog dancing that night. Jimmy Neal and I became dear friends. And then, as he was wont to do, he had another brilliant idea to create a national organization, NAPS, the National Association for the Preservation and Perpetuation of Storytelling. And if you could say that and pay $5, you could be a member too. And Catherine Wyndham, our beloved storyteller from Alabama, she was the very first one to put up that $5 and sign up as a storyteller and as a member of NAPS, and she joined the board of directors with us. And in those early days, Jimmy Neal had been teaching journalism at the high school. He had opened and run the Parson's Table. He was also the mayor of Jonesborough 3 terms, and so he turned to some family and friends to help out with this new adventure. His sister, Jill Oxidine, and then Jean Smith. He got a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to help move the organization along and the festival to that next level. Eventually, Jimmy Neal took over as director, and as a lot of you know, he had the wisdom to hire really good people, people who stuck around for a long time. Susan O'Connor, 35 years, she's with us tonight. She just retired this year. And so many others came on board and stayed because of Jimmy Neal's inquisitiveness, his openness, and his way to accomplish things. Under Jimmy Neal's leadership, Jonesborough would eventually become, as you've heard, the storytelling capital of the world. And the festival grew from those 45 of us, or as Jimmy Neal said, 60, gathered around that flatbed truck. Grew from that to 10,000 people in these huge tents spread all across Jonesborough. Quite a remarkable dream unfolding. And how did all this happen? Well, Jimmy Neal was a lot of it. The timing was something else. The folk festival scene, that world was really brewing and kind of coming to life in whole new ways. People were, at least for some moments, turning away from their TVs and reclaiming their heritage and their stories and connecting with others. And here's another reason that the timing was right. Jimmy Neal also had the wisdom to have Ray Hicks come back almost every single year and tell traditional stories. And beyond Ray's gift as a storyteller, and he had lots of those gifts, his very presence at this festival, the way he dressed in those bib overalls, that was real. He worked out in the fields in those bib overalls. He sat on his front porch as people stopped to hear his stories, and he came here to tell stories. He had this old-timey way of talking. There was even a linguist. I was up visiting him once on Beach Mountain, and there was a linguist who stopped by to study the way that Ray spoke, his Elizabethan accent. This linguist said that George Washington and Daniel Boone would have been comfortable talking with Ray Hicks. So Jimmy Neal brought Ray Hicks every year, and he had a way of telling stories that made each one of us listeners feel like we were sitting on his front porch. Well, he caught the attention of the media, regional and national. Word started spreading throughout the country about the National Storytelling Festival. And that storytelling itself was a performing art. We were challenging a notion that was held at the time that storytelling was just for children. Early on, there was a film crew from CBS. Walter Cronkite wanted to air a story about the festival and Ray on his evening news. Journalists from the LA Times, Boston Globe, People Magazine, New York Times, CNN came down. They all showed up. Smithsonian Magazine, National Geographic. Johnny Carson even sent a limo to Ray Hicks' house on Beach Mountain. Ray was working out in the field, and he saw this black, spiffy, fancy car. He told me later, he said, a man got out, and he was dressed in a suit in the middle of the day. And Ray invited him down to the front porch, and this man kind of puffed himself up and told Ray that Johnny Carson wanted to fly him to California and put him on his show. And Ray said, well, you tell Johnny, if he wants to hear some stories, he can come here and sit with me and I'll tell him all about Jack. I don't think that ever happened, but word spread. It spread to all corners of this country. Barbara and I were doing a lot of storytelling at folk music festivals across Canada and the U.S., so we were always inviting those audiences to come down to Jonesborough, come in October. And Jimmy Neal was here on the ground attending to details, the tents, the toilets, the tickets, making sure everything was in order for the tellers and for all these listeners. And that in itself is an incredible legacy. But what else happened? When people came, they saw Jonesborough thriving. They saw how listening to stories together in person created community. And folks who came as strangers, all of a sudden they were feeling like family, like it was a reunion with the people they were sitting next to. As I travel across the United States, I still have people coming up to me and saying, you know, first time I went to the festival, it was my wife. She made me come, and I was kicking and streaming. But I loved it so much. As soon as the new year turns and we get a calendar, Jonesboro's first thing on our pages there for October. And folks went home from here and started having storytelling festivals where they lived, in Utah, in California, in Texas, up in Connecticut. And then it spread to other countries, Canada, Australia, over in England, Ireland, Singapore. Storytelling coming back to this modern age, this performance storytelling. Because storytelling's always been here. It's in our DNA, I feel. We humans will always tell stories. But listening in groups of 1,000 people, the folk festivals, sometimes 15,000 people, listening in that kind of way is an extraordinary experience that Jimmy Neal helped kindle the fire for all of that to happen. And then ISC, the International Center, was collaborating with NASA. You know, folks sending those rockets way up there. Bob, when you were talking about the sewers, I thought from the sewers to the heavens. Jimmy Neal is just right here, you know, spreading storytelling wherever it can be. Also, that master's program that started at ETSU, it's still going on. This all helped inspire that. Youth storytelling, teller in residence. You can come here for 26 weeks in a row, hear a different storyteller. And all of that was Jimmy Neal starting it. Not only, I was talking with Terry Countermine earlier today, and we were talking about Jimmy Neal, and he mentioned, I've loved the word vision, that Jimmy Neal had a vision. And Terry said, well, he was a visionary. Not only did he have the vision, he had the way of creating that vision into reality, of bringing it to us, of getting other people excited about it so they were ready to jump in, just like Bob and some of the other folks, Michael and everyone talking about Brian, all the different things that Jimmy Neal did. Now, I want to say, and in closing here, that Jimmy Neal and I were like family. And like family, we often disagreed on things. We had different ideas about some of the directions that storytelling was going in and how tough situations should be handled. But here's my bottom line. It was Jimmy Neal's inspired vision, his unwavering dedication, and his hard work that profoundly influenced me and countless others in the art of storytelling. He paved the way and shined the light for a revival to rise up, a revival that's continuing to capture people around the world. We now have a place, wherever you turn, where performance storytelling is thriving. So for all of us here, all of you listening online, all of you storytellers everywhere, all of you story listeners everywhere, and from deep in my heart, I want to say thank you, Jimmy Neal, and bravo, a life well lived.
staff and people of the Jackson Theater, thank you very much for letting us come today to celebrate Jim and Neil Smith's legacy of storytelling. Oh, by the way, that's how you pronounce it here in Jonesborough, storytelling. The word storytelling refers to an event and a phenomenon and a whole deal. And I'm amazed to be here with, oh, and let's hear it for another guy dressed up in the middle of the day. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, were you like it?
Oh, that looks all right to me. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. So, okay. Technology is something that came into storytelling. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Some people know how to dress in the middle of the day, and some people don't. Thank you, Jill Oxendine, for inviting me to be part of this incredible program. Thank you, Sandy and Susan and Sheila, for putting this thing together. Thank you, Todd, for all of the sound and light in this building. And thank you all for coming out today. Just south of the Virginia, Tennessee line, there's a place that is dear to my heart. And although I'm a Yankee by birth and design, it was there my new life got its start. There, where every October, 'neath the Tennessee moon, thanks to Jimmy Neal Smith. Go ahead, Ed. Thanks, Jimmy Neal. 1976, I went to the Hartford Folk Festival, and there on the stage were the folk tellers, Connie Reagan Blake and Barbara Freeman, telling the story of where the wild things are, and I hated it. Here they were taking a classic book that I really loved and turning it into a live show with participation. It was too much for me. But afterwards I went up and introduced myself, and they taught me a story that I could use about a little boy and a little girl and a frog. After the show, I'll tell you how to do it yourselves, but they taught me that story. I was working with the Plum Cake Players Children's Theater at the time, and I invited them to come to see our show, Johnny Appleseed's Bag. And they sure enough came to see the show. On that day, the day I met them, I applied the thing that I had learned in first grade at the Holy Cross Catholic School in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania. I learned that when you see someone, especially a very important woman like the nun who was carrying a bag, you always said, "Sister, can I help you with your bag?" That's what I said to the folk tellers. "Sisters, can I help you with your bag?" "Oh, sure, Ed." Not exactly sure what this guy was all about, but I became the unofficial roadie of the folk tellers, and I am proud of that. I would follow them around. They would share their stories with me, and they would share their grapes, and they would share their lives, and they would invite me to come down to Jonesborough, Tennessee. They told me of a storytelling festival. I said, "What? A storytelling festival? Well, you mean for solo performers?" "Yeah, storytellers. We tell stories tandemly with the two of us together, but most of the storytellers are individuals." And I said, "Oh, maybe I could do that." "Well, maybe you could. Come down to Jonesborough, Tennessee, and see what it's all about." And I said, "Are you sure?" And they said, "Yes." And I came down to Jonesborough, Tennessee in 1976 and saw the Storytelling Festival and couldn't believe my eyes, could not believe my ears. Ray Hicks was there, David Holt was there, Catherine Wyndham was there, Doc McConnell was there. And Jimmy Neal Smith was there behind it all. Jimmy Neal Smith, Jimmy Neal Smith, a man a real entrepreneur. Jimmy Neal Smith. Jimmy Neal Smith was a genius. Did you get that idea so far in this presentation? Jimmy Neal Smith was a genius. He was a genius among entrepreneurs. And when he decided to bring the Storytelling Festival into life as he did, it was a pretty amazing thing. I think Jimmy Neal Smith made one mistake in the early days when he turned it into a nonprofit 501c3 corporation instead of keeping it as a private corporation to make some money all for himself. A genius of entrepreneurs. I wonder if he could have taken my advice. He'd be listed in Standard & Poor's. Jimmy Neal Smith, Jimmy Neal Smith, a genius, a fellow I love. Jimmy Neal Smith, Jimmy Neal Smith. Now here's my version of the story that you've heard versions of already before. He was driving some high school kids home, and the radio was on. Jerry Clower started spinning some yarns, and a light bulb went off in Jimmy Neal's head, and the Bugaboo Storytelling Festival was born. Now, not a lot of people know that that was the original story. In fact, Gene Smith will deny this story that I'm telling you now. But truth never got in the way of a good story, as far as I'm concerned. And that come from another storyteller. But Bugaboo Springs, Bugaboo Springs, Bugaboo Springs. The name didn't really sound that rational. Bugaboo Springs sound a little crazy to me. And so Gene Smith said, hey, why don't you call it The National? Jimmy Neal Smith, Jimmy Neal Smith. So that's one of the stories. And then here's another part of the story that Catherine Wyndham came up to him one day. Do you guys know the story of Wicked John and the Devil? The punchline of Wicked John and the Devil, which Doc McConnell tells, Barbara Freeman, Connie Reagan Blake tells this story. It's about Wicked John who it explains the light that comes in the will of the wisp. After all this adventure, Wicked John goes down to the hell, and the devil doesn't want him in because of all the trouble he caused the devil up on earth. And so the devil turns to one of his children and says, give me one of them coals. And they threw a coal at Wicked John, and the devil goes, go start a hell of your own. I like to think of that moment with Catherine Wyndham and the $5 that Connie Reagan Blake talked about a minute ago. Here, Jimmy Neal, here's a call for you. Go start a heaven of your own. Jimmy Neal Smith, Jimmy Neal Smith, an entrepreneur par excellence. Jimmy Neal Smith, I don't know what the rhyme is that's coming, but it has to rhyme with excellence. Jimmy Neal Smith was a choreographer. I was lucky enough to be on the board of the National Association of the Preservation and Perpetuation of Storytelling in the middle and late 80s, and it was amazing to watch Jimmy Neal Smith. Jimmy Neal Smith, working with a board, is an incredible choreographer. We would come together, and I was fascinated by the way this man worked. He would have an idea in his head which did not sound possible. I remember one meeting in the late 80s when he took us to the place, a little alley behind the Chester Inn, and he had a drawing, and he started drawing this thing and talking about the International Storytelling Center. And I thought to myself, whoa, International Storytelling Center, is this guy really for sure going to really work this thing out? And sure enough, he drew the International Storytelling Center, and it came true. Jimmy Neal Smith was a dreamer, but Jimmy Neal Smith was a dreamer who knew how to make dreams come true. It was always amazing for me to watch this man, genius that he was, come up with ideas, put the ideas into place and make it happen. And it was always a pleasure to serve with Jim and Neil on the board, although I never really understood what he was doing. I was always impressed with the results. So here we go with the last verse. Let me sing you the second verse of the song that you know already. It was there I first saw Ray Hicks tell about Jack. First saw Jackie Torrance and Brother Blues act. Heard Doc McConnell spin his medicine yarns and fell under Catherine Wyndham's charms. Now there's a train that goes through Jonesborough that you might know. And sometimes when I'm lonesome out on the road, there might be the whistle of a train. And I dream it's the one that blows through Jonesborough and sings out this welcome refrain. Yankee, come home. Yankee, come home. There's a place on the porch just for you. I was sitting on the porch of the Slevins' house early this morning, practicing my banjo, making sure that I didn't make too many mistakes when I played for you tonight. And sure enough, people came up. One of them was from Australia, and I said, well, welcome. And they said, can you sing a little song for us? And I said, Yankee, come home. Yankee, come home. There's a place on the porch just for you. And there I was on the porch. Yankee, come home. Yankee, come home. Come sit, swap a story or two. Let's try that one last time, and then I'll teach you the new verse. Yankee, come home. Yankee, come home. There's a place on the porch just for you. Yankee, come home. Yankee, come home. Come sit, swap a story or two, or three, or four, or five. Only got 5, which was true when I was invited down here in 1980. Thank you very much, Connie Ring, Blake, and Barbara Freeman. Swap you 5. Here's the new verse. Jimmy's gone home. Jimmy's gone home, but his work, of course I don't know it yet. Jimmy's gone home, Jimmy's gone home. The fruits of the work still survives. Jimmy's gone home, Jimmy's gone home. Let's keep storytelling alive. Can you do it with me? Jimmy's gone home. Jimmy's gone home. The work of this work still survives. Jimmy gone home. Jimmy's gone home. Jimmy's gone home. Let's keep storytelling alive. Last time, Jimmy's gone home. Jimmy's gone home. Still work that he still survives. Jimmy's gone home. Jimmy's gone home. Let's still keep storytelling alive. Jimmy Neal.
My name is Donald Davis, and I've been friends with Jimmy Neal Smith for 44 years. I'm still friends with Jimmy Neal because he lives so largely in my heart and mind and in my memories with deep, deep appreciation. There are 3 things I want to actually say about him today. And the first is to tell you that it's Jimmy Neal's fault that I can't be here with you. You see, I just finished telling stories at a storytelling festival in Alabama, and this evening I'm starting another storytelling event in North Carolina. And if Jimmy Neal had not actually invented those events, you see, I would be here. When he invented and started the National Storytelling Festival, it was not just a single event, because the National Storytelling Festival parented and established the idea for more than 100 other festivals across this country and around the world. In the 44 years that I've been telling stories publicly, I've told at, I think, 88 different festivals, many of them over and over again, and none of those events would even exist if it were not for Jimmy Neal's start. I also wouldn't be living the life that I live without Jimmy Neal, because he's the person who convinced me that I was a storyteller. In the late 70s, he called me on the phone one day and told me about this festival and invited me to come and tell stories. And I said, well, why are you calling me? I don't tell stories. And he said, well, I've heard that you tell a story about your Uncle Frank's fox dog, and if you have one story like that, I know you have more. That first time that he called, I didn't come. I turned it down. I didn't know what he was talking about, but he didn't give up. He called back the next year, and then by the time he called the third time, I had actually thought about some of those stories, and the first time I ever stood on a stage called a storyteller was here in Jonesborough at the National Storytelling Festival in 1981. Without Jimmy Neal, we would never have met Jackie Torrance. We would never have met Ray Hicks. We would never have met Catherine Wyndham. We would never have met Doc McCall. Oh, I shouldn't even start calling the names, because you know they go on and they go on and they go on. And many of those people would never have realized that they were storytellers if it hadn't been for Jimmy Neal's influence. He created the space and he created the people, and it was a whole movement around the world that brought back to us a discovery of the power of storytelling in human lives. But the second thing I want to say is that my awareness of Jimmy Neal's heart was that his great love was not storytelling, it was the town of Jonesborough. And the reason the Storytelling Festival was started to begin with was that he had this little idea that maybe something like that could help the town of Jonesborough keep from becoming one of those many little towns where all the stores are closed and there's no reason for it to exist anymore. Jimmy Neal changed the shape of this town. I happen to have been the chairman of the board for the festival when Jimmy Neal was the mayor of Jonesborough. That's been 40 years ago. And those of you who were around then know that this town physically would not look the same if it hadn't been for Jimmy Neal. He was not a person about power, not a person about attention. He was a person who worked behind the scenes, one-on-one. He never ever gave up. And this town is a different place totally because of him. I am so deeply aware of that love of the town where he lived and where his heart always abided. But one other little thing to remember. When I was on the board and Jimmy Neal was mayor, one day we were actually over in Greenville having lunch for some reason there. And Jimmy Neal said, you know, up on that little hilltop, that's where President Andrew Johnson is buried. Well, I am immensely interested in presidential history. And I said back to Jimmy Neal, well, you know, he was buried wrapped in the American flag with the Constitution rolled up under his head as his pillow. That was his request. Jimmy Neal says, yes, I know that. And you know all about the impeachment, and he only escaped being impeached. I said he only escaped being impeached by a single vote. And then Jimmy Neal looked at me and he said, and you know who cast that one vote? I had no idea. He said it was Senator Edmund Ross of Kansas who kept him from being impeached. And later on, when Grover Cleveland was president, he made Edmund Ross the territorial governor of New Mexico. And in that moment, Jimmy Neal and I discovered that we had a profound shared interest in American presidential history. Jimmy Neal knew more about democracy, more about how our country works, more about the history of every president we've had than anyone I've ever known. And that's one of my great interests. And the reason I'm sharing that is to show you that he had these private internal interests that had nothing to do with storytelling, nothing to do with being the mayor. No, it was just where his heart lived. So he was not a person who had to get his attention from outside. He was a person whose energy grew from inside who he was. He didn't like to be up in front of people. He didn't like to be on the stage and have to say things. No, he liked to do the work in the trenches where it was done. And because of his heart and his life and his internal self, we are all different people and all better because of him. He was a person of great love. He was always a giver and not a taker. He was someone who invested in us and in the places where we lived. And we will all be forever better people because of him. I miss him.
What a fitting tribute with the train whistle here. Thank you. Thank you, Jill, for the invitation to be a part of this celebration and honoring your brother. It really is. It is an honor to be a part of this, and I appreciate the invitation. Thank you to our storytellers, to Donald, figuring out how to join us from wherever he joined us from. It looks like right across the road. He couldn't make the trip across, but somehow or another he figured out how to be here with us. Connie, I love that. That's just such a touching tribute of Jimmy Neal, and I appreciate it. And Ed, I don't know if I've ever really enjoyed banjo music before today. That was a really neat way to do a tribute, so thank you for sharing that. Bob, my gosh, just such beautiful, beautiful memories you shared. Thank you. And to the Appalachian Men's Ensemble and to Michael and the International Storytelling Center. But really, to all of you, thank you for the gift of your time today, because I said it at the beginning, and I really believe there is no more sacred gift that we can offer to one another than the gift of our presence. And by being here today and giving your time, you have helped to honor the legacy of an amazing man by showing up and sharing stories in music, in speech, in listening. And I know that Jimmy Neal would be honored to see his life and his legacy celebrated in the way we have today. Jimmy's family, especially his son Eric, would like to thank Amber Crumley and the Jackson Theater, the International Storytelling Center, the town of Jonesborough for hosting this beautiful celebration. On behalf of everybody involved, I hope you will all stick around, continue the celebration of Jimmy's life and legacy. We're going to gather right across the road at the plaza of the Storytelling Center for a reception. Jonesborough Novelty Band is going to keep playing some music. We'll have some desserts and beverages prepared from the menu of the Parson's table. Yes. Yeah, what a great way to, and that is, again, one of the first restaurants I ever ate at after we moved to Tennessee, owned and operated by Jimmy Neal. So stick around, keep telling stories, Let's keep Jimmy's legacy and memory alive in the most fitting way we can. I'd like to offer as closing words a poem that Jill shared with me, asked me to read today, because it evokes so many memories of her brother. It is by the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish. It's titled, Think of Others. As you prepare your breakfast, think of others. Don't forget to feed the pigeons. As you conduct your wars, think of others. And don't forget those who want peace. As you pay your water bill, think of others. Think of those who have only the clouds from which to drink. As you go home, your own home, think of others. Don't forget those who live in tents. As you sleep and count the stars, think of others. For there are people who have no place to sleep. As you liberate yourself with metaphors, those of others, those who have lost their right to speak. As you think of distant others, think of yourself and say, I wish I were a candle in the darkness. Bless you, Jimmy Neal Smith. Going home. Amen.